Hey, folks, welcome to American Agenda. I'm Bob Sellers.
And I'm Katrina Zisch. Thanks for being with us.
Well, we are awaiting U.S. prosecutors who have now charged disgraced founder of the now bankrupt cryptocurrency exchange FTX, Sam Bankman Fried, with 8 counts, including wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You're looking right now at the Southern District of New York. We are awaiting their press conference in which they will officially announce those charges.
That's right. And the 30-year-old is in police custody today after being arrested last night in the Bahamas. These charges are on top of what the Security and Exchange Commission already filed. They accuse him of using proceeds to buy real estate on behalf of himself and his family. Our correspondent Sarah Williamson has the latest. Hi, Sarah.
Hi to the both of you. That's right. The disgraced crypto entrepreneur arriving in the magistrate's court in the Bahamas earlier today under heavy police escort and not restrained in any way. Now, Sam Bankman Fried was taken through the back entrance of the court for his first appearance as he awaits extradition to the U.S. after the U.S. Department of Justice filed criminal charges. Now, the Bahamian prosecutor is arguing that that Bankman Fried is a flight risk and not to be granted bail. The unsealing of a criminal indictment today in New York shows prosecutors are charging Bankman Fried with those 8 counts, including, as you mentioned, wire fraud on customers and lenders and conspiracy, including conspiring to defraud the United States. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York will be holding that press conference any moment now. As you mentioned, it's scheduled to be held at 2 p.m. to announce that indictment. Now, the Securities and Exchange Commission also filing civil charges against Bankman Fried today, alleging he misled investors that committed around $2 billion to FTX. Speaking today at the ongoing House Committee on Financial Services hearing, the new CEO of FTX, Mr. John Wright III, says the collapse of the company stems solely from grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals. And when asked how and when more than 1 million people can access their money frozen in FTX, Mr. Wray had this to say.
That's an ongoing process. We've secured all of the cash in the bank accounts to the extent that we can at this point. We've secured crypto assets. We're still in the process of doing that. I mean, ultimately, that's a question of months. The litigation has been pointed out by other members. Certainly will take a longer time frame.
Sam Bankman Fried is also meant to be speaking at that committee hearing, but has been declining to do so far and is under arrest, so therefore he can't. Now, the Bahamas has an extradition treaty with the US, but it is unclear how long it will take for Bankman Fried to be back on home soil. It is said that the process can take weeks and even longer if the criminal defendant does contest it. Bob and Katrina.
All right, Sarah, thank you very much. Can we take a gander once again at the Southern District of New York? We are awaiting their presence to come out and talk about it. Again, this individual is in the Bahamas and has made off with tens of millions, if not billions of dollars, in fact, of investor money, customer money. And they're joining us right now to discuss some of the details and what the reaction may be. Legally, Executive Chairman of Strive Asset Management, Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek, tell me your thoughts right now as we see this unfolding.
Look, one of the things that I paid attention to today was the timing of this announcement. I thought it was an uncanny non-coincidence that he was indicted right on the eve of actually the testimony he was going to give in front of Congress. That was a problem to me, I think, because it reflected the fears of the DOJ probably that they were going to be embarrassed by whatever he said, saying that, you know what, if it came up in the hearings that the questions were why wasn't he prosecuted, well, I think they were avoiding that by getting ahead of the curve. So I thought that was a little bit of a politicized timing, which is never a good thing in the criminal justice system. But most importantly, I hope this is the first step towards getting transparency and accountability to what happened here. And I hope the last step is actually remembering that this isn't just about SBF and FTX. I think a lot of the fraud that he committed dates back to a lot of other financial institutions that have behaved in similar ways all the way dating back to the 2008 financial crisis. And that's actually one of the themes I'm keeping in mind as well.
Yeah, Vivek, Bob and I were discussing this earlier, that this really isn't about cryptocurrency. It's about fraud. It is about lying. It is about basically stealing other people's money.
Exactly. And the temptation is to think it's some technical cryptocurrency exchange. The real answer is it's just stealing somebody else's money. MF Global, we saw the same thing happen. It was another exchange that wasn't a crypto exchange that was run by John Corzine, former Goldman exec, former Democratic governor of New Jersey. A lot of the same smoke screens of virtue signaling to the good guys that ended up being guilty of actually stealing customer funds. Now, he got off the hook with just a $5 million settlement, I believe, in that case. And so I think one of the things that this FTX SBF saga ought to teach us is that the more we see these virtue signalers using smoke screens to deflect accountability, the more we should scrutinize their motives and their actions. And that's not specific to cryptocurrency. That is true for many of the financial elites, even after the post-2008 era. I think that's one of the unspoken lessons of this saga.
So connect the dots for us. What do you think his motivations were, especially giving tens of millions of dollars to Washington?
Well, you pretend like you care about something other than profit and power, precisely to gain more profit and power. That is the magic trick at the center of 21st century American capitalism. He talked about effective altruism, gave tens of millions of dollars to the political party that was affiliated with the good guys or viewed as the good guys. He was somebody whose firm, actually, this is laughable, FTX, received from one prominent ESG ratings firm a higher score on leadership and governance than did ExxonMobil. And it's sad to me that we see this play out time and again. It reminds me of Volkswagen, where actually the chairman was an ESG darling, where they won ESG awards, only to have been found that that company tampered with their emissions detectors. We see this movie play itself out time and again, and I think it's creating that virtue spleen of smoke, what I call woke smoke, to deflect attention and accountability for the actual wrongdoing at the company.
Let me give you one asterisk to this being related to crypto and crypto not mattering, because I couldn't agree more. He took other people's money and is alleged to have made off with it, okay? Like Bernie made off with it. But there is also a lack of regulation when it comes to these exchanges like FTX. And people can put money and put crypto into those exchanges, and if they disappear, it's not like in your bank. If the money in your bank disappears, there's federal insurance on that, and there are regulations against that, and there are requirements for compliance. That doesn't exist so far as when it comes to crypto. And I'm wondering if that's not a coincidence that he's given all this money to Washington, and Washington is very slow to regulate.
So this is actually requires getting into some detail. It's a great point you make, but the first thing I would mention is that the ambiguity in regulatory infrastructure is actually what led a lot of these companies to set up their exchanges in the Bahamas.
Yes.
Now, the irony here is that SBF actually was the face of calling for so-called responsible regulation in D.C. But if you double-click on that, he was actually calling for crypto-wide regulation, when in fact he was running a centralized exchange. And a centralized exchange, whether it's for crypto or for other assets, is something where the exchange owner actually takes possession of your assets. That's what happened with MF Global about a decade ago. And anytime someone else takes possession of your assets, there's a risk of theft. There's a different type of exchange emerging in the crypto world known as decentralized exchanges, which have problems of their own, by the way, and I've written about this in the Wall Street Journal on both sides of this. But the irony is that SBF was doing what many captains of industry do, catch-all regulation that might have even competitively advantaged himself versus different types of exchanges that would have been saddled with the same regulatory regime. So believe me, I'm not some crypto evangelist. I think that there are deep questions about the future of crypto and exchanges that need to be adjudicated. But the easy answer for the government is going to come up with some knee-jerk regulatory response from Elizabeth Warren or whoever, when in fact that may create the conditions for more frauds like this in the future.
Yeah, Vivek, thank you very much. Let's listen in now. Southern District of New York, Department of Justice.
FTX, one of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchanges, collapsed, destroying billions of dollars in customer value overnight. And for every day of the past month, the dedicated prosecutors of this office and our partners at the FBI, SEC, and CFTC have been working around the clock to figure out what happened and to begin the process of seeking justice. This morning, we unsealed an 8-count indictment charging Sam Bankman Fried, FTX's founder, with a series of interrelated fraud schemes that contributed to FTX's collapse. I authorized these charges last week, Wednesday. A grand jury here in Manhattan indicted Mr. Bankman Fried last week, Friday. We obtained a warrant for his arrest, and that arrest was executed yesterday in the Bahamas. Now, let me be clear. My remarks today are going to be limited. That is by design. This investigation is very much ongoing, and it is moving very quickly. But I also want to be clear about something else. While this is our first public announcement, it will not be our last. The indictment has 8 counts, but effectively, it outlines 4 different areas of misconduct. First, we allege that Bankman Fried defrauded customers of FTX.com, the cryptocurrency exchange that he founded. Second, we allege that he defrauded lenders to Alameda Research, his proprietary hedge fund. Third, we allege that he defrauded investors in FTX. And lastly, we allege that he violated campaign finance laws. Now, let me say a little bit more about what we allege in the indictment. First, we charge that from 2019 until earlier this year, Bankman Fried and his co-conspirators stole billions of dollars from FTX customers. He used that money for his personal benefit, including to make personal investments and to cover expenses and debts of his hedge fund, Alameda Research. Secondly, and relatedly, we charge that Bankman Fried lied to Alameda's lenders about the source of the money that he was using to pay those debts. Third, we charge that earlier this year, in the midst of the crypto crisis, Bankman Fried lied to investors in FTX about the fact that he had sent billions of dollars in FTX customer money to Alameda. And fourth, we charge that Bankman Fried violated federal campaign finance laws by causing tens of millions of dollars in illegal campaign contributions to be made to candidates and committees associated with both Democrats and Republicans. These contributions were disguised to look like they were coming from wealthy co-conspirators, when in fact, the contributions were funded by Alameda Research with stolen customer money. And all of this dirty money was used in service of Bankman Fried's desire to buy bipartisan influence and impact the direction of public policy in Washington. To anyone who is watching this or hears about this prosecution, if you believe that you have been a victim of these schemes or you have information about the conduct that we've alleged in our indictment that we've unsealed today, please let us know. To any person, entity, or political campaign that has received stolen customer money, we ask that you work with us to return that money to the innocent victims. And to anyone who participated in wrongdoing at FTX or Alameda Research and who has not yet come forward, I would strongly encourage you to come see us before we come see you. Now, let me say a word about our partners at the FBI, the SEC, and the CFTC. The women and men of the FBI are some of the finest public servants in this country, and they have been with us since day one in this investigation, and there is no one better to work with. I want to thank the brilliant lawyers at the SEC and the CFTC. This investigation is complex and it's sprawling.
All right, folks, you've been listening in. The Southern District of New York Department of Justice outlining the charges in a general way against Sam Bankman Fried, who was arrested yesterday at their behest in the Bahamas after an indictment was issued last Friday. Essentially 4 counts of different types of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit that fraud, also lying to investors, lying to lenders, and there's also violating campaign finance law. Let's bring Vivek back in to discuss this. I don't know what the violations are on campaign law. Vivek, I don't know if you have insight on that, but that's interesting because they're even saying here this is somebody who was trying to buy influence in Washington for their own ends.
So look, reacting in real time, there were a couple things that were notable there. I thought the inclusion of the campaign finance violations is probably a good thing because it puts a spotlight on one of the essences of this crime, which was the smokescreen that he endeavored to create. I think it was very interesting that the person who led that announcement, I think probably the head of the Southern District, was very specific to say that it was bipartisan, and it'll be interesting to see how bipartisan those contributions were.
Yes.
SBF has suggested that he actually didn't announce or publicize his Republican ones to preserve a better image for himself. But I think that the essence of that charge could be, and we'd have to see further evidence of more, but if you read between the lines, something of using corporate funds and even stolen funds for campaign finance. I thought that was a good development. One thing that stood out to me, though, was actually the claim of characterizing that the investors in FTX, so the equity investors in FTX, not the customers, but the people who put up money and supposed to do due diligence on this firm were in the category of the victims here, rather than in the category of people who actually bear some responsibility. From Sequoia to firms like BlackRock, these were firms that invested in FTX. Unlike the customers, if FTX as an exchange succeeded, these people actually stood to make lots of money, whereas the customers, their funds were invested not in the company, but just on the exchange. So I thought that was a really interesting framing that puts them on the victim side of the line, rather than possibly even a question we ought to have, which is whether venture capital investors and professional investors ought to have done greater due diligence using their own clients' money in a case like FTX, where I think, and I strongly suspect, it might have actually been missing here. So that was an interesting move.
And by leaving out the customers of FTX, by the way, that's notable also, because that's when you get into a lack of regulation, a lack of somebody looking out for those customers that are trusting it's legit.
So what I did here in the first few charges was at least looking after the customer funds, which should be the bullseye target.
There
here.
aren't any, Vivek. We know that. They can look out for it, but there aren't funds left.
Yeah, exactly. Or they're claiming, or the new CEO today, I guess, was claiming that they're aiming to recover as much as possible. But recompense for those individuals, I
there's
think, is
not
going
much
to be
there.
mostly lacking.
I'm afraid we have to run, Vivek. I'd talk to you all hour, but unfortunately, we have to go make some money, I think, by selling some time here. So, Vivek Ramaswamy, thank you so much for your insight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And coming up, Secretary Mayorkas is at the border today as the largest migrant group ever has crossed into the United States. What's he going to do about it? More after this.